threats that whether she would or not she should be his. He showed an indifference that was most insulting to everything which might attract attention and injure her character. Knobsticks, those who consent to work at lower wages. And still she never saw Jem. She knew he had returned home. She heard of him occasionally through his cousin, who roved gaily from house to house, finding and making friends everywhere. But she never saw him. What was she to think? Had he given her up? Were a few hasty words, spoken in a moment of irritation, to stamp her lot through life? At times she thought that she could bear this meekly, happy in her own constant power of loving. For of change or of forgetfulness she did not dream. Then at other times her state of impatience was such, that it required all her self-restraint to prevent her from going and seeking him out, and, as man would do to man, or woman to woman, begging him to forgive her hasty words, and allow her to retract them, and bidding him accept of the love that was filling her whole heart. She wished Margaret had not advised her against such a manner of proceeding. She believed it was her friend's words that seemed to make such a simple action impossible, in spite of all the internal urgings. But a friend's advice is only thus powerful, when it puts into language the secret oracle of our souls. It was the whisperings of her womanly nature that caused her to shrink from any unmaidenly action, not Margaret's counsel. All this time, this 10 days or so, of Will's visit to Manchester, there was something going on which interested Mary even now, and which, in former times, would have exceedingly amused and excited her. She saw as clearly as if told in words that the merry, random, boisterous sailor had fallen deeply in love with the quiet, prim, somewhat plain Margaret. She doubted if Margaret was aware of it, and yet, as she watched more closely, she began to think some instinct made the blind girl feel whose eyes were so often fixed upon her pale face, that some inner feeling made the delicate and becoming rose-flush steal over her countenance. She did not speak so decidedly as before. There was a hesitation in her manner that seemed to make her very attractive, as if something softer, more lovable than excellent sense, were coming in as a motive for speech. Her eyes had always been soft, and were in no ways disfigured by her blindness, and now seemed to have a new charm, as they quivered under their white downcast lids. She must be conscious, thought Mary, heart answering to heart. Will's love had no blushings, no downcast eyes, no weighing of words. It was as open and undisguised as his nature. Yet he seemed afraid of the answer its acknowledgment might meet with. It was Margaret's angelic voice that had entranced him, and which made him think of her as a being of some other sphere that he feared to woo. So he tried to propitiate Job in all manner of ways. He went over to Liverpool to rummage in his great sea chest for the flying fish. No very odorous present, by the way. He hesitated over a child's caul for some time, which was, in his eyes, a far greater treasure than any exotes. What use could it be of to a landsman? Then Margaret's voice rang in his ears, and he determined to sacrifice it, his most precious possession, to one whom she loved as she did her grandfather. It was rather a relief to him, when, having put it and the flying fish together in a brown paper parcel, and sat upon them for security all the way in the railroad, he found that Job was so indifferent to the precious call, that he might easily claim it again. He hung about Margaret, till he had received many warnings and reproaches from his conscience in behalf of his dear Aunt Alice's claims upon his time. He went away. Then he bethought him of some other little word with Job, and he turned back and stood talking once more in Margaret's presence, door in hand, only waiting for some little speech of encouragement to come in and sit down again. But as the invitation was not given, he was forced to leave at last and go and do his duty. 4 days had Jem Wilson watched for Mr. Harry Carson, without success. His hours of going and returning to his home were so irregular, owing to the meetings and consultations among the masters, which were rendered necessary by the turn out. On the 5th, without any purpose on Jem's part, they met. It was the workmen's dinner hour, the interval between 12 and 1, when the streets of Manchester are comparatively quiet, for a few shopping ladies and lounging gentlemen count for nothing in that busy, bustling living place. Jem had been on an errand for his master. Instead of returning to his dinner, and in passing along a lane, a road, called, in compliment to the intentions of some future builder and street, he encountered Harry Carson, the only person, as far as he saw, beside himself, treading the unfrequented path. Along one side ran a high broad fence, blackened over by coal tar, and spiked and stuck with pointed nails at the top, to prevent anyone from climbing over into the garden beyond. By this fence was the footpath. The carriage road was such as no carriage, no, not even a cart, could possibly have passed along without Hercules to assist in lifting it out of the deep clay ruts. On the other side of the way was a dead brick wall, and a field after that, where there was a saw pit and joiner's shed. Jem's heart beat violently when he saw the gay, handsome young man approaching, with a light, buoyant step. This, then, was he whom Mary loved. It was, perhaps, no wonder, for he seemed to the poor smith so elegant, so well appointed, that he felt the superiority in externals, strangely and painfully for an instant. Then something uprose within him, and told him that a man's a man for a that, and twice as much as a that. And he no longer felt troubled by the outward appearance of his rival. Harry Carson came on, lightly bounding over the dirty places with almost a lad's buoyancy. To his surprise the dark, sturdy-looking artisan stopped him by saying respectfully, "May I speak a word with you, sir?" "Certainly, my good man," looking his astonishment, then finding that the promised speech did not come very quickly, he added, "But make haste, for I'm in a hurry." Jem had cast about for some less abrupt way of broaching the subject uppermost in his mind than he now found himself obliged to use. With a husky voice that trembled as he spoke, he said, "I think, sir, you're keeping company with a young woman called Mary Barton." A light broke in upon Henry Carson's mind, and he paused before he gave the answer for which the other waited. Could this man be a lover of Mary's? And, strange stinging thought, could he be beloved by her, and so have caused her obstinate rejection of himself? He looked at Jem from head to foot, a black, grimy mechanic, in dirty fustian clothes, strongly built, and awkward.